A tragedy separated father and daughter before they could even meet. 6 years later, the impossible happens. A girl identical to his deceased daughter appears before him with a shocking revelation. As buried secrets come to light, ancient truths threaten to destroy everything that remains of the family. But nothing prepares this man for the final twist, one that defies logic, blood, and destiny itself. This story has piqued your interest. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The imposing Albright mansion was known throughout Rosewood Heights as the Crystal House, not just for the stained glass windows that reflected the morning sun on its white walls, but for the air of untouchable perfection that its owner, Gustav Albright, demanded in every detail. A man in his 50s, with graying hair at the temples and deep-set eyes that had not smiled in a very long time. The morning sun illuminated the estate's impeccable gardens as Gustav stood motionless by his office window, watching the clouds drift over the Blue Ridge Mountains. The silence was broken only by the ticking of the antique clock, an heirloom from his grandfather, one of the region's first real estate developers. "Sir, your coffee is served," announced Nancy, the housekeeper who had been with him for over 20 years. Gustav did not respond. His eyes were fixed on the empty swing hanging from the cherry tree, swaying gently with the morning breeze. 5 years ago, that same swing was filled with children's laughter. "Today marks a year," he finally murmured, without looking away. Nancy sighed. Approaching cautiously, "You need to eat something, sir." Miss Eleanor called, asking if you will attend the board meeting today. "Cancel it," he replied dryly. "Tell her I'm indisposed." The housekeeper hesitated, holding the silver tray firmly. "Mr. Gustav, it's been a year. Life needs to go on." He turned slowly, his face a mask of containment. "What life, Nancy?" "Mine ended in that fire." The words hung in the air like the echo of an irrevocable sentence. Gustav turned back to the window, reliving in his mind the day he lost everything. 6 years ago, Gustav was a different man. CEO of the Albright Group, he built luxurious buildings and resorts across the country. He was married to Felicity, a talented violinist who had abandoned a promising career with the Sterling City Symphony Orchestra to be with him. After years of trying, they were expecting twins and happiness seemed complete. The delivery, however, became complicated. Felicity suffered a severe hemorrhage, and between saving the mother or the babies, the doctors did their best, but Felicity did not survive. Of the twins, the doctors informed them that only one had survived, Laura. The other little one, who was to be named Clara, did not withstand the complications of childbirth. The blow was devastating. Gustav, consumed by grief, withdrew from business to dedicate himself entirely to his remaining daughter. For 5 years, Laura became his sole purpose. The girl grew up surrounded by love and excessive protection in the Rosewood Heights mansion, far from the tumult of Sterling City. Laura was extraordinary. At 5 years old, she already played the piano by ear, inheriting her mother's musical talent. She had Felicity's same almond-shaped eyes and the same way of tilting her head when concentrating. Gustav rediscovered the meaning of life through her, until fate, relentless, struck him again. On a rainy night, while Gustav was in Grandview City for an unavoidable meeting, a short circuit caused a fire in the east wing of the mansion, precisely where Laura's room was located. When firefighters arrived, part of the structure had already collapsed. After days of searching through the debris, no trace of the girl was found. Authorities presumed the small body had been entirely consumed by the intense flames. Something in Gustav was also consumed in that fire. He rebuilt the mansion exactly as it was, keeping Laura's room intact as an untouchable sanctuary. He definitively withdrew from business, delegating everything to his partners. His days were reduced to long silences, solitary walks through the gardens, and visits to the memorial he had erected for his daughter in St. Jude's Cemetery. Back in the present, Gustav adjusted his dark tie in front of the mirror. It was the day to visit Laura's grave, a ritual he faithfully observed every week. From the nightstand, he picked up a small butterfly-shaped hair clip, the last gift he had given his daughter, and which, by some miracle, had been found intact among the debris. In the cemetery, the wind rustled the leaves of the golden-leafed maples that framed the paths between the graves. Gustav walked with heavy steps, carrying a small bouquet of daisies, Laura's favorites. Upon reaching the Albright family memorial, he knelt before the small headstone where Laura Albright, our angel for 5 brief years, was engraved. "Hi, little one," he murmured, placing the flowers. "Daddy's here." The silence of the cemetery was broken only by the distant singing of birds. Gustav spoke in a low voice, as he always did, telling his daughter about his week, about the new robin's nest in the garden, about how he missed her every minute. It was a painful monologue he repeated weekly, his only connection to what remained of his family. As he spoke, he didn't notice the silent presence approaching from behind. Only when he felt a soft touch on his shoulder did he turn, surprised. There before him stood a girl of approximately 6 years old, wearing a simple dress and a ribbon in her hair. Her almond-shaped eyes stared at him with a mixture of fear and expectation. Gustav's heart stopped. That face, it was impossible. Identical to Laura's, as if he were facing a ghost. The same dimple on her left cheek, the same wavy brown hair, the same eyes she had inherited from Felicity. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. The girl hesitated, clutching a small rag doll to her chest. "The lady from the orphanage told me you're my father," she replied in a low voice, almost a whisper. "My name is Clara." Gustav's world stopped. Clara, the name chosen for the twin who supposedly hadn't survived childbirth. He looked around, searching for an adult accompanying the girl. But they were alone among the graves. "This isn't possible," he stammered, his face pale as the clouds now covering the Rosewood Heights sky. The girl took a small step forward, extending a crumpled envelope. "The director told me to give you this. She said she would explain everything." With trembling hands, Gustav took the envelope. Before he could open it, the girl spoke again. "Is it true I have a sister just like me?" The question hit Gustav like a bolt of lightning. How could she know about Laura? Who was this child who seemed an exact reflection of the daughter he had lost? And, above all, could what his eyes were seeing be true? That Clara, the daughter he believed lost at birth, was alive and standing before him. The businessman felt the world spin around him as the pieces of an impossible puzzle began to move in his mind. Looking once more at the girl's face, he saw in it not only the ghost of Laura, but also Felicity's unmistakable smile. Gustav stared at the envelope in his hands as if it were a bomb about to explode. His name was handwritten on the front, in careful cursive script. Beside him the girl waited patiently, rocking on her heels with a maturity strange for her age. "Who brought you here?" Gustav finally asked, trying to organize his thoughts. "Aunt Marcia, from the Morning Light Orphanage," Clara replied, pointing to a middle-aged woman who was observing the scene from afar near the cemetery gates. "She said she needed to go to the market and would be back in an hour to pick me up." Gustav waved to the woman, who returned the gesture with a nod before walking away. He turned back to the girl, unable to tear his eyes from that face which was a perfect mirror of Laura's. With trembling fingers, he tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter on Morning Light Orphanage letterhead. The heading stated that the institution was located in Willow Creek, a neighboring district of Rosewood Heights. "Dear Mr. Albright," the letter began, "the circumstances that lead us to make this contact are extraordinary. Clara Oliver was left in our care 2 months ago, following the passing of her adoptive parents, Julian and Teresa Oliver, in a landslide in the mountain region. Among the belongings they left behind, we found documents suggesting that Clara is, in fact, your biological daughter." Gustav stopped reading, feeling his heart race. He looked at Clara, who was now curiously exploring the flowers around Laura's grave. He continued reading, "A preliminary DNA test, conducted with a sample of your profile available in the National Genetic Database for Businessmen. Confirmed compatibility. Attached to this letter are the documents we found. A birth certificate from St. Teresa's Hospital, adoption records, and a diary belonging to the late Mrs. Oliver, mentioning suspicious circumstances surrounding the child's adoption. We request your contact to discuss the next legal steps. Clara only knows that there was a possibility of finding her biological father, but no additional details." Gustav felt his legs give way. He sat on the stone bench near the grave, trying to absorb that impossible turn of events. "Do you live at the orphanage?" he asked the girl, who was now approaching again. "For 2 months," Clara replied, sitting beside him with disconcerting naturalness. "Before I lived with my parents in Willow Creek. We had a small house near the river. Daddy Julian made wooden furniture, and Mommy Teresa had a candy stall at the market. The natural way she spoke of her adoptive parents moved Gustav. There were no tears, just a serene acceptance that seemed beyond her age. "I'm so sorry about your parents," he said sincerely. Clara shook her head. "The social worker said they're in a better place now. But I miss them every day." She paused, looking directly into Gustav's eyes. "Are you really my real dad?" The direct question caught him off guard. Looking at that face, so identical to Laura's, there was no denying it. Something in his heart already knew the answer, but his rational mind demanded confirmations, proofs, explanations. Perhaps, he replied cautiously. "I need to understand better what happened. The director said I took a test that shows I'm your daughter. She told me I have a twin sister." Clara looked at Laura's headstone. "Is that her?" Gustav felt a tightness in his chest. "Yes," he replied with difficulty. "Her name was Laura." "Was?" Clara tilted her head the same way Laura used to. "She's not here anymore." "There was an accident," Gustav replied, choosing his words carefully. "A fire in our house." Clara remained silent for a few moments, absorbing the information with surprising maturity. "I've dreamed about a fire many times," she finally said. "Mommy Teresa used to say they were just nightmares." A shiver ran down Gustav's spine. How could this girl dream of the fire that took Laura? Was it coincidence or something deeper, inexplicable? "Why didn't you ever visit me before?" Clara asked, interrupting his thoughts. The innocent question was like a knife. How could he explain to a child that he didn't even know of her existence? That for 6 years he believed she had died at birth? "It's complicated, Clara. I didn't know you existed." "How didn't you know?" The question revealed her childlike confusion. "Mommy Teresa always knew I existed." Gustav almost smiled at the child's simple logic. "It's different. When you and your sister were born, the doctors told me only Laura had survived." The girl's face lit up with understanding. "Oh, so it was a doctor's mistake." "It seems so," Gustav replied, although he suspected there was much more to the story than a simple mistake. He checked his watch. The social worker would be back in half an hour. He needed to make a decision. Common sense told him to take it slow, verify all documents, talk to lawyers. But his heart, which carried the emptiness left by Laura, screamed something else. "Would you like to see my house?" he asked, surprised by his own words. Clara's face lit up. "Can I?" "We can talk to the social worker. Perhaps you can visit me while we sort out the situation." Clara smiled, and Gustav felt a pang in his chest. It was Laura's same smile, the same dimple on her left cheek. "Should I go get my things from the orphanage?" she asked, already getting up excitedly. "First, we need to talk to the authorities," Gustav replied cautiously. "There are legal procedures." As they walked towards the cemetery gate to wait for the social worker, Gustav felt a mixture of emotions he hadn't experienced in a long time. Fear, hope, confusion, but above all a spark of life he had thought extinguished. As they reached the gate, the social worker was already waiting for them. Earlier than the agreed time, "Mr. Albright," she greeted formally, extending her hand. "I'm Marcia Taylor, the social worker responsible for Clara's case. I see you've already met." "Yes," Gustav replied, still stunned. "We need to discuss this extraordinary situation." "Of course. I suggest we go to the orphanage, where we have all the documentation and can discuss it privately." During the drive to Willow Creek, Clara fell asleep in the back seat of Gustav's car. Through the rearview mirror, he observed that serene face, so identical to that of the daughter he had lost. The Morning Light Orphanage was a simple but well-maintained building, surrounded by trees. The director, Louisa Stone, a woman with a stern expression but kind eyes, received them in her office. "Mr. Albright, it's an honor to meet you. I regret that it's under these circumstances." "How was this possible?" he asked directly, as Clara was led away by Marcia to play with other children. "How does my daughter, whom I believe to have died at birth, reappear 6 years later?" The director opened a thick folder full of documents. "What we know comes primarily from the adoptive mother's diary, Teresa Oliver. According to her accounts, they couldn't have children and had been on the adoption waiting list for years. A nurse at St. Teresa's Hospital, a distant cousin of Teresa's, informed her that there was a newborn whose mother had died in childbirth and whose father, A busy businessman had shown no interest in the child. That's absurd. Gustav slammed his hand on the table, indignant. I would never abandon a daughter. We believe you, sir. That's why we initiated the investigation as soon as we found this information. The director continued. The Olivers adopted Clara through irregular procedures, facilitated by this nurse. They genuinely believed they were helping a rejected child. Only years later, when they saw your photo in a news report about the mansion fire, did they realize the possible connection. Teresa mentions in her diary her horror at discovering that the girl might have in fact been stolen from her family. And why didn't they contact me? Fear, sir. Fear of losing the daughter they raised with so much love, and fear of legal repercussions. But Teresa wrote that she planned to contact you when Clara turned 10. Unfortunately, the landslide prevented her from carrying out that plan. Gustav felt anger mixed with compassion for the couple who had cared for his daughter. Guilty or not, they had loved Clara. And the nurse? He asked. Where is she? We don't know. According to hospital records, Janet Miller resigned shortly after the twins' birth and moved out of state. We are trying to track her down, but so far without success. The director slid a sealed envelope across the table. This is the result of the comparative DNA test, conducted with judicial authorization due to the exceptional circumstances. It confirms with 99.9% certainty that Clara is your biological daughter. Gustav opened the envelope with trembling hands. The numbers and technical terms meant little compared to the certainty he had already felt looking into Clara's eyes. She was his daughter, Laura's twin, the girl he had believed lost even before he knew her. What are the procedures now? He asked, determined. Legally, as a biological father with never formally relinquished rights, you can request immediate custody, which will almost certainly be granted, given the circumstances, but Clara has suffered a great loss recently. The transition needs to be gradual, careful. She needs emotional stability. Gustav nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. Can I see her again today? 2 weeks had passed since the encounter in the cemetery. Gustav completely reorganized his life, making daily visits to the orphanage to get to know Clara better. Every moment with the girl rekindled a light that had long been extinguished in his heart. Director Louisa, initially cautious, began to look favorably upon the natural connection forming between father and daughter. She talks about you all the time, Marcia commented during one of the visits. She asks if she can bring her favorite books when she comes to your house. Gustav smiled. The idea of bringing Clara home was finally becoming a reality. The legal proceedings were moving swiftly, thanks to the influence of his lawyer, Dr. Marcus Ford, who had moved heaven and earth to expedite the process. All documents are in order, Dr. Marcus informed him, in his Rosewood Heights office. The family court judge recognized your paternal rights and granted provisional custody. In 3 months, if all goes well, permanent custody will be formalized. Gustav breathed a sigh of relief, but a shadow still lingered in his thoughts. What about the nurse? Janet Miller. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. Still no trace. It seems she left the country shortly after the events. There are records of her entry into Canada, but after that, nothing. Gustav clenched his fists. The idea that someone had deliberately separated him from his daughter, causing 6 years of unnecessary suffering, was unbearable. Keep looking, he ordered. I want answers. Gustav, the lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder. I understand your indignation, but now the focus must be Clara. Her adaptation to her new life will be challenging. Gustav nodded, acknowledging the wisdom of the advice. In recent days, he had worked intensely to prepare for Clara's arrival. He had renovated a room next to his own, decorating it in pastel tones with shelves full of books and toys. He had hired a child psychologist, Dr. Camilla Vance, to guide him through the transition. Clara is accustomed to a simple lifestyle, the psychologist explained. The opulence of the mansion might intimidate her. We need to create spaces of familiarity, connections to her previous life. Following the advice, Gustav included in the room's decor some furniture made by Julian Oliver, Clara's adoptive father, which he had managed to retrieve from the family's old house, now condemned after the landslide. He also set aside a space for the rag dolls Teresa used to sew for her daughter. On the day set to pick up Clara, the Rosewood Heights sky dawned particularly blue. Gustav woke before his alarm, with a mixture of anxiety and expectation. After a breakfast he barely touched, he drove to the orphanage. Clara was waiting for him at the entrance, a small backpack on her back and a timid smile on her face. She wore a light blue dress, a gift from Gustav the previous week, and her hair was carefully styled in 2 braids. "Are you ready?" he asked, kneeling to be at the girl's height. She nodded, but her eyes revealed insecurity. "Can I visit Mommy Teresa and Daddy Julian's grave before we go?" The request took Gustav by surprise, but he agreed immediately. Understanding and respecting Clara's bond with her adoptive parents would be essential for building trust. The small Willow Creek Cemetery was quite different from the imposing St. Jude's. Clara guided Gustav to a simple grave, where there were 2 vases with fresh flowers, courtesy of the orphanage caregivers, who maintained the tradition Clara had started of bringing flowers weekly. "Mommy Teresa liked daisies," Clara said, adjusting the flowers. "Daddy Julian used to say she looked like a daisy, always turning her face to the sun." Gustav watched with emotion the naturalness with which Clara spoke of her adoptive parents. There was no resentment in her heart for having been raised by another family, only gratitude and love. "They seem to have been wonderful people," he commented sincerely. "They were," Clara confirmed. "Daddy Julian taught me to recognize types of wood just by their smell. And Mommy Teresa taught me how to make caramel." The girl paused, looking at Gustav with questioning eyes. "Can I still call them Mommy and Daddy, even though I'm living with you?" Gustav felt a lump in his throat. "Of course you can, Clara. They were your parents for 6 years. They loved and cared for you. That will never change." The girl smiled, visibly relieved. "And what should I call you?" The question hung in the air. Gustav hadn't thought about it. Demanding the title of father seemed presumptuous at this moment, but the idea of being addressed formally by his own daughter was equally strange. "You can call me Gustav for now," he finally replied. "In time, you'll decide what feels most comfortable." Clara nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. After a last silent farewell to her adoptive parents, she naturally took Gustav's hand, and they walked back to the car. During the drive to Rosewood Heights, Clara watched the mountain landscape with fascination, especially as they began to ascend towards the more affluent areas of the town. "Is your house very big?" she asked as they spotted the first grand estates. "Quite," Gustav admitted. "But don't worry, you'll have your own space. And Nancy, the housekeeper, is practically family. She's eager to meet you." Clara nodded, but Gustav noticed her worried glance. "It's okay if you feel strange at first," he assured her. "It's natural. If you want to change anything in your room, just say so." Upon arriving at the Albright mansion, Clara was visibly impressed. The imposing colonial-style building, with its white columns and exuberant gardens, contrasted radically with the simple house where she had lived in Willow Creek. "It looks like a castle," she murmured, as the automatic gate opened. Gustav smiled. "It's just a big old house. It belonged to my grandfather, and before him to his father." In the entrance hall, Nancy waited anxiously. Upon seeing Clara, she brought her hands to her mouth, unable to contain her emotion. "My goodness," she exclaimed, "it's like seeing a ghost." Gustav cast a warning glance at the housekeeper, but Clara didn't seem bothered. "Did you know my sister?" she asked, curious. Nancy nodded, approaching cautiously. "I cared for her since she was a baby, my dear. And now I'll care for you too, if you'll let me." Clara smiled, accepting the warm embrace Nancy offered. Gustav watched the scene moved. It was the first step in a long journey of adaptation. The initial days were filled with mutual discoveries. Clara explored every corner of the mansion with insatiable curiosity, asking questions about everything. Gustav in turn discovered a unique personality in her. Though physically identical to Laura, Clara had her own way. She was more introspective, more cautious, with a special interest in books and stories. While Laura had been extroverted and impulsive, Clara seemed to absorb the world around her with observant eyes before speaking. On the third day, Gustav found her standing before the closed door of Laura's room. The door had remained locked since the mansion's reconstruction after the fire, preserving the lost girl's sanctuary intact. "What's in there?" Clara asked, sensing Gustav's hesitation. "It was your sister's room," he replied, his voice slightly choked. Clara gently touched the doorknob. "Can I see?" Gustav hesitated. That untouched space was his last refuge, the place where he allowed his grief to flow freely. But denying Clara the right to know the sister she never met seemed unfair. With trembling hands, he took the key from his pocket and opened the door. The room was exactly as it had been on the day of the fire. The bed neatly made with unicorn sheets, the shelves filled with children's books, the easel with an unfinished drawing, the collection of miniature animals carefully organized. Clara entered silently, absorbing every detail. She walked to the dresser and picked up a photo frame with a picture of Laura hugging Gustav. "We really are identical," she murmured, impressed. "Yes," Gustav agreed, standing in the doorway. "But each with her own essence." Clara walked slowly through the room, touching the objects with reverence. She stopped before the upright piano, a child's model that Gustav had bought for Laura when she showed an interest in music. "Did she play?" she asked, running her fingers over the keys. "She was learning," Gustav replied. "She had a natural talent like her mother." Clara sat on the piano bench and, to Gustav's surprise, began to play a simple but harmonious melody. "You play too?" he asked admiringly. "A little," she replied, without stopping her playing. "I had a small keyboard that Daddy Julian found in the junkyard and fixed for me. Mommy Teresa used to say I had music in my fingers, that it was a gift." Gustav felt a chill. Felicity had said exactly the same thing about Laura's musical talent. Coincidence or something deeper? As he watched Clara playing on Laura's piano, an old memory returned. Felicity, 6 months pregnant, playing a lullaby for the twins still in her womb. "So they are born knowing that music is the language of the soul," she used to say. Suddenly, Clara changed the melody. Her fingers began to play notes that formed a familiar sequence, a song Gustav hadn't heard in years. His eyes widened. Where did you learn that music?" he asked, his voice trembling. Clara stopped playing, confused. "I don't know. I think I always knew it. It comes into my head sometimes, especially when I'm almost falling asleep." Gustav felt his legs weaken. That was the song Felicity had composed especially for the twins, a melody that had never been recorded or taught to anyone besides herself. How could Clara know it? "This music," he explained, sitting beside his daughter, "was composed by your mother when she was pregnant. She played it for you both every night." Clara's eyes widened. "So that's why I always felt calm when I played it. Mommy Teresa used to say I must have heard it somewhere and memorized it." Gustav felt a mix of fascination and unease. Could intrauterine memories have remained in Clara's subconscious? Or was there a deeper, more mysterious connection between the separated twins? That night, after putting Clara to sleep in her new room, Gustav went to his study and opened the drawer where he kept the twins' last ultrasound. In the black and white image, 2 small profiles stood out facing each other, as if conversing in a language all their own. "What else did you share besides my blood?" he murmured to the image. "What else does Clara carry with her that I can't explain?" Meanwhile, in the next room, Clara fell asleep, hugging the rag doll she had brought from the orphanage, dreaming of piano melodies and a girl identical to her who smiled and waved from afar, as if she had been waiting for her for a very, very long time. A month had passed since Clara's arrival at the Albright mansion. The adaptation, initially challenging, now flowed with surprising naturalness. Clara attended St. Cecilia's Academy, the same private school Laura had attended, although Gustav had opted to enroll her in a different class to avoid unnecessary comparisons with her deceased sister. That Saturday morning, as they had breakfast on the veranda overlooking the garden, Gustav watched Clara with admiration. The girl was engrossed in a storybook, absorbed in the colorful illustrations while nibbling on toast with jam. There was a serenity in her that contrasted with Laura's constant restlessness. They were physically identical, but their essences seemed complementary, as if each carried half of a whole. "I found an old box in the attic," Nancy commented, serving more juice. "Photographs of Miss Felicity when she was a violinist. I thought the girl might like to see them." Gustav nodded, grateful for the housekeeper's sensitivity. From the beginning, Nancy understood the importance of introducing Clara to her roots without forcing comparisons with Laura. After breakfast, they went to the study, where Nancy had left the box of photographs. Clara sat beside her father on the leather sofa, eager to explore those fragments of the past. "This is your mother," Gustav said, showing a photograph of Felicity with her violin. in front of the Stirling City Municipal Theatre. It was her first concert as the principal violinist of the symphony orchestra. Clara touched the photograph with reverence. "She was beautiful," she whispered. "I have her eyes." "Yes," Gustav agreed, "and the same musical talent." They continued exploring the photographs. Felicity at the beach, Felicity at her conservatory graduation, Felicity and Gustav on their wedding day. Clara absorbed each image intensely, as if trying to reclaim lost time, mentally constructing the figure of the mother she never knew. At the bottom of the box, Gustav found an envelope he didn't recognize. Inside was a handwritten letter in Felicity's elegant script. "What's that?" Clara asked, curious. Gustav examined the yellowed paper. There he were. Date at the top indicated it had been written shortly before the twins' birth. He felt his heart race as he read the first lines. "My dearest Gustav, if you are reading this letter, something has happened to me. I've been having strange dreams these past few weeks, premonitions I can't explain." He stopped, unable to continue reading aloud. The letter seemed like a premonition, as if Felicity knew she wouldn't survive childbirth. "Can I see?" Clara asked. Gustav hesitated, uncertain if the content would be suitable for a child, but something in Clara's mature gaze convinced him. "My dearest Gustav," the girl read aloud, "if you are reading this letter, something has happened to me. I've been having strange dreams these past few weeks, premonitions I can't explain. Doctors say it's normal, just pregnancy anxiety, but I feel there's more. In the early hours when I play for our daughters still in my womb, I feel them respond to me in some way, as if they already know who they are and what awaits them." Clara paused, looking at Gustav with an intrigued expression before continuing. "If one day something happens to me or to our daughters, never stop searching for the truth. It will find you even when it seems impossible. Take care of our little ones. Teach them to hear the music that exists between them, even when separated. Believe in the inexplicable, in what goes beyond reason. There are more mysteries in the blood we share than we will ever be able to comprehend." The letter continued with loving farewells and practical instructions, but those specific words resonated in the study like an echo from the past that was finally finding its destiny. "It's as if she knew," Clara murmured, returning the letter to Gustav. "As if she had seen the future." Gustav felt a shiver. Felicity had always possessed a keen, almost intuitive sensitivity that often surprised him. There were times when she seemed to foresee events before they occurred, as if she picked up on signals invisible to others. "Your mother was special," he commented, carefully folding the letter. "She saw the world in a different way." That afternoon, while Clara practiced piano under the supervision of the teacher Gustav had hired, he locked himself in his study to reread Felicity's letter. Each word now seemed laden with meaning, like pieces of a puzzle that was beginning to form. Seek the truth. Wasn't that exactly what had happened? The truth about Clara had found its way to him against all odds, and that mention of the music that exists between them. How to explain the fact that Clara knew the melody Felicity had composed without ever having heard it? His thoughts were interrupted by soft knocks on the door. It was Nancy with a worried expression. "Sir, I think you should see this." In the music room, Clara had stopped playing. Sitting at the piano, she was intensely drawing something in her sheet music notebook. Gustav approached silently, looking over his daughter's shoulder. The drawing showed a house in flames. Not just any house, but the east wing of the Albright mansion, with precise details that would be impossible for someone who had never seen it before the fire. And there, standing at the second-story window, was a small figure, a girl with outstretched arms. "Clara," he called softly, "what are you drawing?" The girl seemed to awaken from a trance, looking at her own drawing with surprise. "I don't really know," she replied, confused. "It just came into my head while I was playing." "Have you drawn this before?" "Many times," she admitted, "since I was little. Mummy Teresa kept my drawings in a box. She used to say I had a lot of imagination." Gustav sat beside her, trying to keep his voice calm despite the turmoil within him. "Clara, this house, it's our house, the part that caught fire a year ago, before the reconstruction. The girl's eyes widened. How could I know? I've never been here before. Not consciously, Gustav replied, Felicity's words echoing in his mind, but perhaps in other ways. That night, after putting Clara to sleep, Gustav called Dr. Marcus. He needed to push forward with the investigation into the twins' separation. I've got information on Janet Miller, the lawyer informed him. She worked for 15 years at St. Teresa's Hospital in the obstetrics ward. She had a cousin who couldn't have children. Teresa Oliver, Clara's adoptive mother. So it was premeditated, Gustav concluded, feeling his anger rise. She deliberately separated my daughters. It seems so. According to nurses who worked with her, Janet had a fixation on babies. She had lost a child years earlier and never fully recovered from the trauma. Apparently, when she learned of the twin pregnancy and the complications during childbirth, she saw an opportunity to correct an injustice, as she put it. What injustice? In her distorted view, it was unfair that you, a wealthy man, had 2 daughters, while her cousin, a good and decent woman, couldn't have any. Gustav clenched his fists, imagining the suffering that arbitrary decision had caused everyone involved. Where is she now? I want justice. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Gustav. Janet passed away 3 years ago. Car accident on the road to Toronto. The news hit him like a weight. There would be no confrontation, no direct explanations from the source of the deception that had transformed their lives. And the documents? How did she manage to falsify Clara's death certificate? We're still investigating. We know there was another child who died that night, a premature baby of a teenage mother. We believe Janet might have swapped the records. Gustav felt nauseous. The idea that another family had also been affected by Janet's manipulation made everything even more horrifying. After hanging up, he walked down the corridor to Clara's room. He opened the door silently and observed his sleeping daughter, her serene face illuminated by the moon-shaped nightlight. On the nightstand, her drawing notebook was open, showing new sketches, 2 identical girls holding hands with a piano between them. In the following days, Gustav observed Clara with heightened attention. The girl continued to demonstrate inexplicable knowledge and abilities, small details that suggested a deep connection with the sister she had never known. One afternoon, while exploring the garden, Clara suddenly stopped in front of a cherry tree at the back of the property. There used to be a swing here, she said with certainty. A red swing. Gustav froze. Laura's swing had been removed after the fire, when it became too painful to see it empty. How do you know that, Clara? I don't know, she replied, confused. I just know. She touched the tree trunk. Can I have a swing here again? That night, Gustav couldn't sleep. The coincidences piled up, forming a pattern that defied rational explanations. Felicity's letter, the fire drawings, the music, the swing. How could Clara know so many details of Laura's life? He got up and went to the library. Among the family's old books, he searched for something that might shed some light on the phenomenon. He found a worn volume on psychic phenomena, an inheritance, from his grandfather, who had a fascination with the subject. A chapter caught his attention: telepathic connections between identical twins. The text mentioned documented cases of twins separated at birth who developed identical personalities, tastes, and even mannerisms, despite being raised in completely different environments. Some reported shared dreams, simultaneous physical sensations, and in rare cases specific knowledge that would be impossible for one to access without the other. Science still doesn't fully explain the depth of the connection between identical twins, read a paragraph. Some researchers suggest that in addition to identical genetics, there may be a kind of psychic channel that remains open between them, regardless of physical distance. Could it be possible that Clara and Laura had maintained this connection even after Laura's physical departure? That part of Laura's experiences, memories, and talents had somehow remained alive through Clara. Gustav closed the book, feeling simultaneously frightened and comforted. The idea was scientifically questionable, but emotionally powerful. It would mean that Laura had never completely left. That part of her lived on in Clara, not just in the identical DNA, but in something deeper. The next morning, during breakfast, Clara surprised Gustav with an unexpected question. "Can we visit my sister's grave today? I feel like I need to talk to her." Gustav almost choked on his coffee. "Of course," he replied, recovering. "But what do you mean by talk to her?" Clara shrugged, as if it were obvious. "Sometimes I feel like she wants to tell me something, like in my dreams." "You dream about Laura?" he asked, surprised. "I don't know if it's her because I've never seen her in person, but I dream of a girl just like me. We're always playing together in a place full of light." At the cemetery, Gustav watched Clara kneeling before Laura's headstone, speaking in a low voice as if having a private conversation. What impressed him most was that the girl showed no sadness or fear, only a serene tranquility, as if reuniting with an old friend. Back at the mansion, Clara asked to see Laura's room again. "Can I touch her things?" she asked hesitantly. "They're yours now too," Gustav replied, realizing it was time to stop treating the room as an untouchable mausoleum. Clara went directly to the bookshelf and, without hesitation, pulled out a specific volume from the third shelf, The Little Prince. "That was her favorite, wasn't it?" she asked, flipping through the book with familiarity. "How do you know?" Clara opened the book to a specific page, where there was an illustration of the little prince looking at the stars. "That was the part she liked best," she stated with conviction, "about the stars that laugh." Gustav felt a shiver. It was true. Laura constantly asked for that passage to be read to her before bed. How could Clara know? That night after dinner, Clara approached Gustav while he was working in his study. "Can I ask you something?" she asked, with an unusual seriousness for her age. "Of course, dear." "Do you think I'm Laura?" The question hit Gustav like a punch. He then realized that his constant observation, his surprised reactions to each new coincidence, might be confusing the girl about her own identity. "No, Clara," he replied firmly. "You are Clara, unique and special. Laura was your sister, part of the same family, the same blood, but each with her own soul, her own journey. But why do I know things about her? Why do I play the music she played, like the books she liked?" Gustav pulled his daughter onto his lap, choosing his words carefully. "You are identical twins. You share the same DNA. You were formed together in your mother's womb. It's natural that you have similar tastes, similar talents, and perhaps there's a connection between you that science doesn't fully explain." Clara seemed to reflect deeply on the explanation. "Like an invisible thread," she suggested. "Perhaps," Gustav agreed, "a thread that neither distance nor time nor even what happened to Laura could completely sever." 3 months passed. Autumn in Rosewood Heights covered the Albright Mansion's gardens with golden leaves that Clara loved to collect in an album, organizing them by size and shape. The girl had completely adapted to her new life, attending school with good performance and developing friendships. Her presence had brought back to the mansion a vitality that seemed lost forever. Gustav had also changed. He had gradually resumed control of his businesses, albeit with a different approach. He delegated more, valued free time, and made sure to be home in time for dinner with Clara and to follow her progress in piano lessons. He had started therapy with Dr. Richard Lowe, a psychologist recommended by Dr. Camilla, seeking to properly process his losses and build a healthy relationship with Clara. "You need to allow Clara to develop her own identity," Dr. Richard had advised in one of the sessions. "It's natural for you to notice similarities with Laura, but be careful not to project expectations based on the daughter you lost." Gustav took the advice seriously. He encouraged Clara to explore her own interests, even when they differed from Laura's. While his deceased daughter loved ballet, Clara showed a preference for swimming. Laura collected butterflies, Clara leaves and stones. Small differences that Gustav now celebrated as part of his rediscovered daughter's individuality. That Saturday morning, breakfast was interrupted by a call from Dr. Marcus. Gustav answered in his study, while Clara continued on the veranda, flipping through a science book. "We have important news," the lawyer announced. "We found Marissa Thompson, a nurse who worked with Janet Miller at the time of the twins' birth. She agreed to talk, but only in person, and with guarantees that there will be no legal repercussions for her. "Where is she?" Gustav asked, feeling his heart race. "In Cedar Ridge. She's been working at a private clinic for over 5 years. I'll go today." "Gustav, she seems frightened. She says Janet didn't act alone, that there were other people involved." "What people?" "She wouldn't say over the phone. She fears retaliation." After hanging up, Gustav remained motionless for a few minutes, digesting the information. If Janet hadn't acted alone, who else would be involved in separating his daughters? And why would anyone other than the nurse have an interest in this manipulation? He returned to the veranda, where Clara was now drawing intently. "Darling, I need to take care of an important matter in Cedar Ridge today. Do you mind staying with Nancy? I promise to be back before dinner." Clara nodded, lifting her eyes from her drawing. "Does it have to do with what happened to me and Laura?" The girl's perceptiveness never ceased to surprise him. "Yes, I'm trying to understand exactly how you ended up with the Olivers." Clara bit her lip, thoughtful. "Sometimes I think it was fate. If I hadn't stayed with Mommy Teresa and Daddy Julian, I wouldn't be who I am today. And if I had stayed here, maybe I would have been in the room when the fire happened." The observation struck Gustav like a lightning bolt. It was something he had never considered. If Clara hadn't been separated from him, she might have been a victim of the same fire that took Laura. The idea was disturbing and, paradoxically, almost redemptive, as if Janet's mistake had inadvertently saved one of the twins. "You're very wise for your age," he commented, kissing the top of his daughter's head. "I'll be back soon." The drive from Rosewood Heights to Cedar Ridge was short, less than an hour through the mountains. Dr. Marcus was waiting for him at the entrance of St. Monica's clinic, a discreet establishment on the outskirts of the town. "She's nervous," the lawyer warned. "Try not to be too confrontational." Marissa Thompson was a woman of approximately 60 years old, with grey hair pulled back into a severe bun and restless eyes that avoided direct contact. She received them in a small staff break room, checking several times that the door was securely closed before beginning to speak. "First, I want to make it clear that I only found out about everything later," she began, wringing her hands. "By the time I suspected, it was already too late to reverse it." "Found out about what exactly?" Gustav asked, containing his impatience. "The swap. The manipulation of records." She paused. "Janet was my friend. We had worked together for years. She lost her only child in an accident and never fully recovered from the trauma. She had a fixation on babies, especially twins. When she learned that your wife was expecting twins, she became obsessed with the case." "Why?" "Janet believed in predestination, in literal soulmates. She used to say that identical twins were a single soul divided into 2 bodies, and that if one died, the other would carry both spirits." Marissa took a deep breath. "It sounds crazy, I know, but to her, it made sense." Gustav exchanged a look with Dr. Marcus, remembering Clara's inexplicable behaviors, the knowledge she shouldn't have. "Continue," he urged. "When your wife had complications during childbirth, it was chaos in the operating room. The doctors focused on saving her, but unfortunately they couldn't. The twins were taken to separate incubators. Both were alive and healthy despite being premature." The information hit Gustav like a punch. Both alive. Neither had died at birth, as he had been told. "That same night," Marissa continued, "a teenager gave birth to a baby who was stillborn. Janet saw an opportunity. She swapped the records, declaring one of your daughters as the deceased baby, and the deceased baby as your daughter who didn't survive. Then she handed your living daughter, Clara, to her cousin Teresa, who couldn't have children. How did she manage to do that without anyone noticing? The hospital was in crisis during that period. Staff shortages, flawed administrative processes. Janet worked in the night records department and had access to the system. No one checked twice." Gustav felt his anger grow, but he maintained his composure. "You said she didn't act alone." Marissa hesitated, looking at the door as if she feared someone was listening. "What I'm about to say is only what Janet told me years later, when she was ill. I have no proof. She lowered her voice. She mentioned that she received a significant sum to make the swap, an agreement with someone from the Albright family. Gustav felt as if the ground disappeared beneath his feet. My family? Who? She never revealed the full name. She only mentioned an initial, E. She said that this person wanted to separate the twins due to some issue of inheritance or future power, something about a family prediction or prophecy. E. Eleanor Albright, his great-aunt, his grandfather's elder sister, who had always had a fascination with occultism and esoteric beliefs, the same one who had vehemently opposed his marriage to Felicity, claiming she was not suitable for the Albright lineage. Eleanor, who had temporarily taken control of the family business during the period Gustav had isolated himself after losing Felicity and supposedly Clara. That doesn't make sense, he murmured, trying to process the information. Why would Eleanor care so much? Marissa shrugged. Janet mentioned something about an old book, a kind of family diary or grimoire. She said Eleanor believed that identical twins in the Albright lineage would bring about the end of the family fortune. An ancient superstition, apparently. Dr. Marcus touched Gustav's arm, noticing his pallor. We need more than the words of a deceased woman, Ms. Thompson. Is there any proof of this transaction? Any document, payment record? Not that I know of. But, she hesitated again. Janet kept a diary. She wrote everything down. She was almost compulsive. After her death, her belongings were sent to her sister, who lives in New Hampton. Perhaps there's something there. On the way back to Rosewood Heights, Gustav remained silent in the passenger seat as Dr. Marcus drove. The revelation about Eleanor was too disturbing to process immediately. Do you think it's possible, the lawyer finally asked, your great-aunt to have orchestrated all this because of superstitions? Eleanor has always been peculiar, Gustav replied, looking out the window at the mountains that lined the road. She's lived isolated in the west wing of the mansion for years, rarely appearing at family events. But to separate my daughters because of some absurd belief, he shook his head. It seems insane. Many old families have their superstitions, especially wealthy families with a history of power. The Albrights have been in Rosewood Heights since Victorian England, haven't they? Gustav nodded. My great-great-grandfather was a counsellor to King George IV. He received lands in the region as a reward for services rendered to the crown. And Eleanor is the oldest of her generation. Perhaps she sees herself as a guardian of family traditions that others have forgotten or ignore. The hypothesis was disturbing, but it made a strange kind of sense. Eleanor had always been obsessed with the purity and continuity of the Albright lineage. She had opposed almost all family marriages, including Gustav's parents. And her reaction to the news of the twin pregnancy had been strange, a mixture of horror and fascination that Gustav had interpreted at the time as mere eccentricity. I need to talk to her, he decided. Today. Do you want me to come along? No, it's a family conversation, but be on standby in case I need legal assistance. Upon arriving at the mansion, Gustav found Clara and Nancy in the kitchen preparing cinnamon cookies. The sweet aroma and domestic scene contrasted drastically with the disturbing revelations he had just received. You're back early, Clara observed, her hands covered in flour. Change of plans, he forced a smile. I'm going to visit your great-great-aunt Eleanor. She lives in the other wing of the mansion. Clara's eyes widened. Is there someone else living here? I've never seen anyone. Eleanor rarely leaves her quarters. She's very old and reserved. Nancy cast Gustav a worried look. She knew Eleanor well enough to know that an unexpected visit would not be well received. Shall I let her know, sir? It won't be necessary. The west wing of the Albright mansion was like stepping into another era. While the rest of the house had been modernized over the years, Eleanor maintained the original 19th century decor. Heavy rosewood furniture, oil portraits of ancestors, tapestries darkened by time. The air had a peculiar scent of lavender and old books. Gustav knocked on his great-aunt's private study door, a room that, according to rumors among the staff, she rarely left. Enter, a firm voice commanded, surprisingly strong for a 92-year-old woman. Eleanor Albright was seated in a leather armchair near the window, a book open on her lap. Her white hair was impeccably styled in a bun, and she wore a formal grey silk dress, as if she were about to receive important guests. Her blue eyes, the most striking feature of the Albrights, examined Gustav coldly. "What an unusual surprise," she commented, closing the book. "How long has it been?" 2 years? "A year and a half," Gustav corrected. "At Laura's funeral." "Ah, yes, the girl. A regrettable tragedy." The lack of emotion in Eleanor's voice when mentioning Laura's death had always bothered Gustav. Now, in light of the new revelations, it seemed even more disturbing. "I need to talk about something important, Aunt Eleanor. Related to business, I presume. I heard you've resumed your place on the board. A sensible decision." "It's not about business." Gustav remained standing, declining his aunt's gesture towards a nearby chair. "It's about Clara, my other daughter, the twin who supposedly didn't survive childbirth." For the first time, he saw a flicker of something in the old woman's eyes. Surprise? Fear? Irritation? Quickly replaced by her usual mask of indifference. "I don't understand what you're talking about, Gustav. Has the tragedy affected your mind more than I imagined?" "Clara is alive, Aunt Eleanor. She always has been. She was separated from us at birth, given to a family in Willow Creek. A nurse named Janet Miller falsified the records, declaring her deceased." Eleanor remained impassive. "And what does that have to do with me?" "The nurse didn't act alone. She received payment from someone in the family, someone whose initial is E." A heavy silence fell over the room. For a long moment, the only sounds were the ticking of the pendulum clock and the wind rustling the curtains. "Dangerous assumptions, my nephew," Eleanor finally replied, her voice cold as ice. "Based on what?" "On the word of a dead nurse conveyed by another frightened nurse. It would hardly be accepted in any court of law. I'm not talking about courts or legal justice. I want the truth, Eleanor. Why separate my daughters? What harm could 2 innocent children represent to you? Or to the Albright name?" Eleanor sighed, suddenly appearing tired, more fitting for her advanced age. "Agatha's book," she murmured almost to herself. "What?" "Your great-great-grandmother Agatha Albright's diary. Have you never wondered why there are no records of twins in the family history? In 6 generations, not a single pair." Gustav frowned. He had never thought of that. Coincidence? There's no such thing as coincidence, Gustav. There's vigilance, caution, protection of the family legacy. Eleanor indicated a bookshelf filled with leather-bound books. Agatha recorded everything. The curse, the prophecy, the signs. What curse? What prophecy? What are you talking about? Eleanor rose with surprising vigor and walked to the bookshelf. She pulled out an ancient volume, bound in dark leather with metal clasps. The book seemed to weigh in her hands as she extended it to Gustav. "Read for yourself." Page 217, The Birth of the Albright Twins in 1843 and What Happened Afterward. Gustav held the heavy ledger book as if it were a bomb about to explode. The yellowed pages exuded the characteristic scent of old paper, preserved for decades away from humidity and light. He hesitated before opening it, staring at Eleanor with a mixture of disbelief and distrust. "Do you want me to believe that you manipulated my family's life because of superstitions recorded in a diary nearly 2 centuries old?" "They are not superstitions," Eleanor replied dryly. "They are careful observations, events documented over generations." "Open to the page I indicated." Reluctantly, Gustav leafed through the diary until he found page 217. The handwriting was elegant but small, requiring concentration to decipher. The text was dated May 23, 1843. "Today the twins turn 3, the entry began. "Identical as 2 drops of water, yet of such distinct temperaments. Antonia is sweet and contemplative, Beatrice vibrant and assertive. The Baron insists there is no cause for fear, that the old Indian woman's prediction is mere folly, but I see the signs he ignores. When the girls are together, the clocks in the house stop. The plants around them bloom out of season, and those shared dreams that make them wake at the exact same moment, screaming the same words. This is not natural. God forgive me, but I fear for the future of this family, as long as the 2 remain under the same roof." Gustav looked up from the book, disturbed. "What happened to these twins?" "Keep reading," Eleanor commanded. He turned the page, finding an entry dated 6 months later. "The fever took Beatrice last night. The doctor says nothing could have been done, that the epidemic has ravaged the entire province. But I cannot help but think that in some way it was the hand of Providence. The Baron is inconsolable, and Antonia weeps for her sister, as if a part of herself had left. Perhaps it has. Today, as we watched over the small coffin, Antonia whispered in my ear, "Grandma, Beatrice said she's going to stay with me forever now." When I questioned how she could have spoken to her dead sister, she replied naturally, "She lives inside here now," and pointed to her own chest. The maid who overheard fainted in terror. Gustav continued to flip through the pages, reading sparse excerpts about how Antonia, after her sister's death, developed talents she had never shown before, began to speak languages she had never learned, and more disturbingly, occasionally referred to herself as we or by her deceased sister's name. 3 years after the tragedy, the Baron lost everything and failed investments. The family, once influential in the imperial court, fell into disgrace. We only didn't lose the Rosewood Heights property because it was in Antonia's name, protected by a legal arrangement the Baron had made to safeguard his daughter's future. On his deathbed, he confessed to believing that the financial ruin was part of the curse, the price for having defied fate by keeping the twins together after the first signs. Gustav closed the book forcefully, returning it to his aunt. "This is madness, Eleanor. We are in the 21st century, not Victorian England. There are no curses, no destinies preordained by superstitions." "No." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Then how do you explain what's happening with Clara? The inexplicable knowledge, the abilities she never learned, the dreams about a sister she never knew." Gustav paled. "How did Eleanor know these details?" "I have my own eyes and ears in the mansion, my nephew," she replied, as if reading his thoughts. "Do you think I didn't notice the arrival of a girl identical to the one who left? That I don't hear Nancy's reports about the disturbing coincidences? So you admit you were behind the twins' separation? That you used a mentally unstable nurse to steal my daughter?" Eleanor sighed, sitting down again with careful movements. "I tried to warn you and Felicity during the pregnancy. I explained the risks, the family history, showed you the diary. You laughed, called it outdated superstition. So I took measures to protect not only the Albright patrimony, but the girls themselves." "Protect them?" Gustav barely contained his indignation. "By separating them without consent, causing years of unnecessary suffering?" "Read the rest of the diary, Gustav." The pattern repeats. In 1897, another pair of twins was born into the family. They were kept together, despite the warnings. At 12 years old, one of them mysteriously disappeared during a walk in the mountains. Her body was never found. The other developed a second personality, claiming to be her sister living through her. The family lost political influence. Properties were confiscated during revolts. Fortunes disappeared. Eleanor paused, looking out the window as if she could see the past reflected in the glass. In every generation that defied the pattern, there were consequences. Separation by death or tragedy, followed by inexplicable manifestations in the surviving twin, and then family decline. The only exception was in 1921, when my own grandmother, upon discovering she was expecting twins, sent one of them to be raised by distant relatives in Ireland. The girls lived separate, healthy lives, never knowing of each other's existence. And the family prospered. Gustav shook his head, disgusted. So that was it? A cold decision to separate my daughters as if they were defective goods that could affect the family business. It was a pragmatic decision, based on documented historical patterns. "You should thank me." "Thank you," Gustav almost shouted. "For what exactly? For depriving me of my daughter? For condemning Clara to grow up away from her true family? Or for failing in your plan since now the two are reunited under the same roof again?" Eleanor frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Laura was gone in the fire. "The separation is permanent now, as it should be." A heavy silence fell between them. Gustav then realized that Eleanor didn't know everything. To her, the plan had worked. The twins were permanently separated by Laura's death, and now Clara was taking her place, maintaining the balance that superstition demanded. Only one Albright twin per generation. "What happened after you separated the twins?" he asked, trying to control his voice. "Janet delivered Clara to the Olivers, a simple but decent couple who couldn't have children. They never knew the full truth, only that the child needed a home. I sent money monthly through intermediaries to ensure she had comfort and proper education. I monitored her development from a distance. And the fire? Did you have any part in that too? Eleanor seemed genuinely shocked. Certainly not. It was a terrible accident. I deeply regretted the loss of little Laura. But it conveniently reinforced your theory about the curse, Gustav observed bitterly. It confirmed the pattern, Eleanor corrected. The separation was too late. You lived with both of them together for 5 years, ignoring the signs. Fate found its own way to balance the equation. Gustav couldn't take it anymore. Eleanor's calculating coldness, the manipulation of lives for archaic beliefs, the total absence of remorse, all of it was too repulsive to continue enduring. Never again interfere in my family's life, he warned, heading for the door. Clara is my daughter, and she will live under my roof with or without your approval. If you try anything against her, no ancestral diary will protect you from the legal consequences. You don't understand what's at stake, Eleanor insisted, but Gustav had already left the room, closing the door with enough force to make the portraits on the walls tremble. Back in the main wing of the mansion, Gustav found Clara still in the kitchen, now helping Nancy put the freshly baked cookies into glass jars. The normalcy of the scene, a happy child covered in flour laughing with the housekeeper, contrasted dramatically with the somber conversation he had just had. "Is everything okay?" Clara asked, noticing his disturbed expression. "Yes, dear. Just a difficult conversation with your great-great-aunt." Clara tilted her head, with that characteristic gesture that always reminded him of Laura. "Is she the lady with white hair who sometimes watches from the second-story window?" Gustav frowned. "You saw her?" "A few times. She watches me from afar when I'm in the garden, but she never comes down to talk to me." The thought of Eleanor secretly watching Clara was disturbing, but Gustav decided not to show concern. "She's very old and rarely leaves her quarters." Clara nodded, accepting the explanation, and returned to organizing cookies with Nancy. Gustav watched her for a moment before heading to his study, where he immediately called Dr. Marcus. "I need you to initiate legal proceedings to remove Eleanor Albright from my property," he instructed without preamble. "Gustav, she's a 92-year-old woman. She has rights guaranteed by your grandfather's will. You can't just evict her." She confessed, Marcus. "She was the one who orchestrated the separation of my daughters, paid the nurse, manipulated records, all because of superstitions about twins in the Albright family." A silence on the other end of the line. "That is very serious. Do we have proof?" Her verbal confession and an old diary she keeps as an instruction manual for her disturbed decisions. "I don't know if it's legally sufficient, but I cannot keep her under the same roof as Clara. I understand your concern. I will analyze the options. Meanwhile, I suggest caution. Eleanor may have allies inside and outside the mansion whom we don't know about." The warning was sensible. If Eleanor kept eyes and ears in the house, as she claimed, there was a risk that other staff or close acquaintances were involved in her schemes. That night, Gustav had difficulty sleeping. The day's revelations spun in his mind like a macabre carousel. Eleanor's confession, the disturbing entries in Agatha's diary, the possibility that the pattern of tragedies involving Albright twins was more than coincidence. As much as his rational mind rejected such superstitions, he could not deny the inexplicable facts involving Clara. The knowledge of the melody she had never heard, the drawings of the fire, the information about Laura she had no way of knowing. There was something there that defied conventional explanations. He got out of bed and went to Clara's room, opening the door silently to check if everything was all right. The girl slept peacefully, illuminated by the soft glow of the moon-shaped nightlight. In her serene expression, Gustav saw traces of Laura, of Felicity, and something uniquely his own, a perfect combination of past and present, a genetic miracle that transcended simplistic explanations. Back in his room, he made a decision. Regardless of curses or family traditions, he would not allow fear to dictate his actions. Clara was his daughter, the last living link to Felicity and Laura. Protecting her meant not only keeping her physically safe, but also emotionally whole, free to develop her own identity without the weight of superstitions or expectations based on her lost sister. The next morning, during breakfast, he surprised Clara with a proposal. "How about we travel for a while? See new places, maybe the coast? You've never seen the ocean, have you?" The girl's eyes sparkled. "Never." Mommy Teresa always said she would take me one day, but her voice trailed off, remembering that plan had never materialized. Then it settled. We can go to Brighton Beach or Seabrook Cove, quiet places with beautiful beaches. Clara frowned, thoughtful. What about school? And your work meetings? School can wait a few weeks. As for work, Gustav smiled, I think I've dedicated too much time to the company and too little to my family. It's time to rebalance those priorities. Clara's smile lit up her face in a way that strongly reminded him of Laura in her happiest moments. For a fleeting instant, Gustav could almost see the two girls superimposed, like a double image, not in a disturbing way, as Eleanor would suggest, but as a reminder of life's continuity, of the flow of love that persisted despite losses. Can I bring my drawing notebook? I want to draw the sea. Of course you can. And we'll buy new supplies too. Paints, brushes, everything you need. While Clara ran off excitedly to tell Nancy about the trip, Gustav called Marcus again. Change of plans. I'm taking Clara away for a while. I want distance from Eleanor and all this oppressive atmosphere while you legally investigate how to remove her from the mansion. Sensible decision, the lawyer approved. Where are you going? I have a house in Seabrook Cove that I rarely use. It's discreet, comfortable, away from the family's gaze. Do you need additional security? I can recommend reliable professionals. Gustav considered the offer. Part of him wanted to reject the idea, believing that the danger posed by Eleanor was more superstitious than real. But another part, the one that had witnessed his great-aunt's cold determination to separate his daughters, recognized that precautions were necessary. Yes, please. Something discreet, that won't frighten Clara. 3 days later, Gustav's Land Rover left Rosewood Heights heading for the Atlantic coast. In the back seat, Clara watched fascinated by the gradual change in landscape, the mountain ranges giving way to plains, the intense green of the Atlantic forest, the first glimpses of the ocean in the distance. The house in Seabrook Cove, a restored colonial building in the historic center, was smaller and cozier than the mansion. It had a small internal garden with a cherry tree, a coincidence that didn't go unnoticed by Gustav, and was just a few minutes' walk from the beach. The following days were filled with discoveries and reconnection. Clara experienced the sea for the first time, initially apprehensive of the waves, then giving herself over to the joy of jumping over them. They visited the historic center, with its cobblestone streets and colorful old houses. They ate at simple seaside restaurants, tasted exotic-flavored ice creams, and took boat trips to nearby islands. With each new experience, Gustav watched Clara blossom, developing confidence and independence, away from the mansion's shadow and the memories of Laura that permeated every corner. She seemed freer to simply be Clara, not a substitute, not a genetic enigma, just a 6-year-old girl discovering the world. A week after their arrival in Seabrook Cove, during breakfast on the house's veranda, Gustav's phone rang. It was Marcus with urgent news. Eleanor was hospitalized last night, he informed without preamble. Ischemic stroke, according to the doctors. Serious condition, but stable. Gustav felt a contradictory mix of emotions, natural concern for the health of an elderly relative, but also an undeniable sense of relief, knowing she no longer posed an immediate threat to Clara. They found something interesting in her room, the lawyer continued. A folder with dozens of reports on Clara over the years. Photos of her at different ages, school reports, even medical records. Eleanor meticulously monitored her without ever making contact. How did she obtain this information? She paid a private investigator. And here's the most interesting part. In the most recent reports, the tone changes. Eleanor begins to question her own beliefs. There are notes like Clara is developing normally, without the signs predicted in the diary, or no anomalous manifestations despite the separation. It seems she was reviewing her convictions. The revelation was surprising. The image of Eleanor as an inflexible fanatic began to gain more complex nuances. There's more, Marcus continued. Among the papers, they found an envelope addressed to you with instructions for delivery after her death. Given the circumstances, Eleanor's nurse deemed it appropriate to deliver it now. What does it say? I don't know. It's sealed. I sent it with a trusted courier who should arrive in Seabrook Cove by the end of the day. The envelope arrived in the early afternoon. Clara was at the beach with the temporary nanny Gustav had hired, allowing him privacy to deal with the potentially disturbing content. With slightly trembling hands, he opened the envelope and found several pages written in Eleanor's elegant and precise handwriting, along with a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "Gustav," the letter began, "when you read this, I will likely have departed. Advanced age brings a clarity I did not possess when I was younger and more arrogant. I dedicated my life to protecting the Albright legacy, following traditions and beliefs passed down through generations. Now nearing the end, I question whether I caused more harm than I prevented." Gustav paused, surprised by the confessional tone, so different from the inflexible demeanor Eleanor had always presented. "The separation of your daughters was my greatest mistake and my greatest sin. I acted out of conviction, not malice, but that does not diminish the suffering I caused. What at first seemed to confirm my beliefs, the fire, the loss of Laura, I now recognize as a tragic coincidence that I exploited to justify unjustifiable actions." The following words revealed an Eleanor unknown to Gustav, a woman who, in the solitude of her quarters, had begun to question decades of blind devotion to family superstitions, especially after observing Clara's normal development from a distance. In the package accompanying this letter is the final proof of my surrender to the evidence. It is the pendant that belonged to your great-grandmother, passed from mother to firstborn daughter for generations. It should have gone to Felicity, but I refused to give it to her when you married, convinced that she was not worthy of the Albright legacy. Now it belongs to Clara, by right of birth and by heart. Gustav opened the small package and found a delicate blue sapphire pendant encased in aged silver filigree. The jewel was magnificent in its classic simplicity, a tangible symbol of the Albright lineage that Eleanor finally recognized as belonging to Clara as well. The letter ended with a plea for forgiveness that Gustav wasn't sure he could grant completely, but which at least opened space for understanding. Eleanor was not a calculating monster, but a woman shaped by generations of superstitions and fears, who had finally begun to question the foundations of her convictions. When Clara returned from the beach, skipping and with sun-reddened cheeks, Gustav decided not to mention the letter or Eleanor's health condition. Instead, he put the pendant away for a special moment in the future, when the girl would be older and could better understand the complexity of her family heritage. That night, sitting on the veranda watching the sea under the moonlight, Clara surprised her father with an unexpected question. "Daddy, do you think Laura would be happy to see me here with you?" It was the first time Clara had called him Daddy, and the naturalness with which the word emerged moved Gustav deeply. "I'm sure she would." "Dear?" Clara smiled, satisfied with the simple answer. She picked up her drawing notebook and showed Gustav her latest creation, two identical girls holding hands on a beach very similar to the one they had visited that day. Between them, an adult female figure with features vaguely resembling Felicity's photographs. "I dreamed about this yesterday," Clara explained. "The three of us together on the beach. Instead of finding the drawing disturbing, as Eleanor certainly would have, Gustav saw in it something comforting, not a supernatural manifestation, but the natural work of a child's subconscious processing fragments of information about her family through the universal language of dreams and art. It's a beautiful drawing," he praised, hugging her. "We can frame it when we go back home." The mention of returning brought a shadow to Clara's eyes. Do we really have to go back? "I like it here. The ocean makes a noise that helps me sleep," Gustav reflected. There was nothing truly tying them to the Rosewood Heights mansion. It was a property laden with painful memories, ancient superstitions, and now Eleanor's ailing presence. The company could be managed remotely with occasional visits. Clara could attend a local school, grow up near the ocean that had so enchanted her. "What if we didn't go back?" he suggested, surprised by his own spontaneity. "What if we stayed here, or perhaps looked for a bigger house in the area? A new beginning for the two of us." Clara's face lit up. "Can we really? We can do what makes us happy, Clara. That's what family means. Building together what makes sense for us, not what others expect or what the past dictates." That night, as he watched Clara sleeping peacefully, Gustav felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The shadows of the past, Felicity's loss, Clara's disappearance, Laura's departure, would never completely disappear. But now there was room for light, for new beginnings, for new chapters that would not be defined by previous tragedies. The Albright legacy would continue, not through imposing mansions or accumulated fortunes, but in Clara's smile, in the talent blossoming in her small hands, in the courage with which she faced each new day. And if one day she asked about the twin sister she never knew, or about the extraordinary circumstances that separated them and eventually brought her back to her father, Gustav would tell her the truth, not with fear of curses or sealed fates, but as a love story that transcended mistakes, losses, and even time. Weeks later, now settled in a new seaside house, Gustav found Clara in the garden, carefully watering a young cherry tree they had planted together. "One day it will grow. And we can hang a swing," the girl commented, looking up as if she could already visualize the mature tree. "Yes," Gustav agreed. "And your children will be able to play on it one day." Clara smiled, satisfied with the idea of continuity, of roots creating new roots. Around her neck, the sapphire pendant Gustav had finally given her shimmered in the sun, not as a symbol of ancient superstitions, but as a promise of a future that honored the past without being its prisoner. And so, on the golden sands of the Atlantic coast, far from the somber mountains of Rosewood Heights, father and daughter rediscovered together the meaning of family, not as a destiny sealed in ancient books, but as a story they freely wrote page by page, day after day, with the indelible ink of love that survives all separations. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that Gustav and Clara's journey has touched your hearts. If this story about bonds that transcend time and distance has stirred emotions in you, we invite you to explore our channel, where we daily bring narratives that explore the complexity of human relationships and the mysteries of life. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next stories. Leave your like on this video and share your impressions in the comments. What did you think of the connection between the twins? Do you believe there are bonds that even separation cannot break? We look forward to reading your opinions and continuing this very special conversation with you. Until our next story,